Hello everyone. Today we're going to go into the interpretation of tolerance. More specifically, the actions and words that are utilized in advocating tolerance or, in some people's perspective, opposing it. It seems to be a huge gap in communication with people in this day and age, and I just like to throw my 2 cents in on how people don't seem to understand how it works. But there seems to be a double standard when it comes to tolerance, and one of the biggest gaps in communication is when somebody can declare the need for tolerance, they advocate tolerance, and then they will turn right around and perform an act that is perceivably intolerant by one party, or perceivably an act of intolerance by one party, and then declare that their actions were justified for various reasons, and they don't realize how that hurts the advocacy that they are trying to send out there. So the average human being doesn't consciously commit a moral act. Most people are incapable of deliberately going, this is a bad thing to do, this is something that is not what a good person does, I'm going to do it anyway. The average human being will perceive it rational because they don't see a better option. They don't know what else can be done, and it becomes more of an impulse move than anything else. The problem is when you're unable to cope with a sense of something imposing on you or imposing on your ideals. When people feel that something that is important to them is being encroached on or invaded on, then they'll often, whether the threat is real or perceived, start making these irrational judgment calls on a frequent basis. And unfortunately, the amoral actions that they normally would be aware of become routine for them, and it desensitizes them to the amoral action thereof. And it is especially effective in desensitizing them when it produces any degree of result that they might be able to perceive in that frantic state of mind as appealing. Not that they necessarily want people to get hurt or that they want people to be afraid, but if it produces a yielding result to something they perceive to be a threat to their ideals or a threat to their beliefs or even a threat to them, then they might see that less than moral action as something that is effective, and then they will cling to that. They won't let it go. Some people will let it go, but I'm talking about the people who won't. And then they start to redefine the standards of what is moral based on the efficiency of that action and the efficiency that it did have in that instance, and they start reprogramming what they believe to be right and wrong based on what gets a reaction. And over time, the redefinition starts to become hypocritical, because what they will do is very obviously something that they will condemn in others. The exact same action they will condemn in somebody else, but they will say it's not the same. It's not the same because the reason they're doing it is to advocate or defend something that is important to them. And I'm not justifying this behavior in any way, shape, or form, but they are justifying it, and that is how they justify it. It's because it is important to them, and the further you get from being important to them, the less they feel that the action is immoral at that point. And especially if you're in opposition to them, then they feel that the action is completely justified and then sometimes even necessary. And in this desensitized state, they've reached a new moral standard. They now see an amoral action as justified, and they see it as moral because they have embraced that idea of moral relativism that I went into in a previous video. They have now decided that the action now has subjective value because under the circumstances favorable to them, it achieves something that they've perceived to be good. It advocates their cause. And since it advocates their cause, which they believe to hold good and promise and all manner of redeeming qualities, then they relate its efficiency to further their cause with the good of the cause itself, and thus it isn't wrong in that regard. And that is, as I have mentioned previously, one of the critical downsides to believing in subjective morality, is that the instant you can relate an action to doing good, then you fail to see the harm that it does do, and you only see the narrow window of efficiency that it is given towards what is important to you. And this, unfortunately, creates an escalating cycle. As they feel their actions met with opposition or met with resentment, then they see that as an inappropriate mindset. They see that as something in the wrong, and they will cling to what good comes from it. They will cling to what productive mindset or reaction or action comes from it, and they will hold to that as their foundation, while everything that goes wrong from it they will attribute to the people whom they are opposing. So when they perform X radical action, and they perform it with all of their might, anything that goes wrong they can attribute to their opposition, and anything that does come out as productive they can credit to the action. And as long as they can get that bit of good out of it, then they're going to continue to do it, and if necessary, they're going to escalate it, because now they have already embraced that pushing harder once did an ounce of good, and as long as an ounce comes of it, and comes from it after enough attempts, after enough repeated attempts, then they see no fault in escalating again. And so the cycle just repeats itself until they become more and more desensitized, not just to right and wrong in general, but anything that comes outside of their sense of perspective. Because as they escalate, they become something that more and more people wish to oppose. They alienate themselves because they are so desperate to do what is right for what they believe in, that they fail to grasp that that is not all there is in the world. That's not all there is in the world around them, and they become the universal enemy of all factors regarding that subject. And they alienate anyone and anyone's desire to relate to them and understand their point, because people are focusing less on the point. They're doing the opposite of what they are. They are focusing on their point and nothing but their point. All everyone else can see is what they are doing to other people. And that's why you can't state that an act is tolerance, or an act is a tolerant act, or you do it for tolerance. You can't state that you are tolerant of this and not of that. You have to either be tolerant in all ways, or watch as you slowly become the monster you once sought to oppose. So, bottom line that I guess I should sum up is that when you decide that an action holds subjective value, you need to do so knowing full well that in the end, you will only be able to interpret that action based on your point of view. Because if you go in there thinking that you'll be able to discern right from wrong and not succumb to your own bias, then you're going to turn into the monster you you wanted to fight, because even though you'll be fighting for your cause, you will have turned everyone else against you, and you will accomplish nothing at that point. Which is part of the reason that a lot of people are very upset with the way things are going this past year, because they don't realize that regardless of how much they wanted to advocate certain very good and noble causes, they point of fact became the monsters that they hated. They just became the monsters they hated for their own cause. And at that point, everyone else had equal right to oppose them. And they did. And this is why things are turning out the way they're turning out. That's just my 2 cents on subjective interpretation of tolerance, and how if you create a double standard for actions, then that double standard will, in the end, turn against you. That's all for now. Peace.